Okay, well, can you believe it's already the last Sunday in September? That just kind of blows me away. I think in one of the versions of my notes, or I know it was in the newsletter, I mentioned this perception of time. So here we are. We are at the final installation of our series called Spiritual Psychology and You. That's been our theme for the whole month. And today we are talking about spiritual psychology and the art of reconciliation. So just to begin, I want to again tell you where the inspiration came from and a little bit of where we start out with this conversation. But first of all, last week we were celebrating Rosh Hashanah and digging into some of the things that we're encouraged to do at that time at the Jewish New Year. And three of those had to do with preparation for Yom Kippur, which is happening on Monday, the 28th, tomorrow at sundown. And the reason I bring that up is because they're related. One is a preparation, and the other is a stepping into what tomorrow is about, which is atonement. So out of all of that came my desire to talk about the art of reconciliation. Now, when we say spiritual, we mean relating to or affecting the human spirit or soul. When we say psychology, we mean the scientific study of the human mind and its functions. And we put them together and recognize that the psyche is representative of both of those things. It is mind and mental, it is spirit, it is unconscious, it is the soul. So also to recap how we roll, the way that we roll is that we look for the connection between what's going on within us and specifically here, our head and heart, what we're thinking and feeling, and what's going on around us. And that is a more finely tuned interpretation of what we mean when we say spiritual. It is a practical application of that growing understanding. We also use what we call a metaphysical point of view. And so a metaphysical point of view looks beyond appearances and behind them and above them to see what they represent, what they're telling us. They're road signs, they're markers, they're signals, they're indicators of what we have been entertaining within that must therefore show up on the outside. And then the empowerment comes because we realize we can consciously choose to plug something different into all of that, which we call the law of cause and effect, and have different outcomes. So we're actually very actively engaged and involved in our own healing and in our own evolution. So today, we point all of that at the art of reconciliation. So what is reconciliation? Well, we're going to start off in a pretty comfortable and familiar place. Anybody in this group do bookkeeping, accounting, even badly? Okay, you don't have to admit it. But if you do any kind of accounting, if you keep a checkbook, if you keep any kind of financial records at all, reconciliation is simply checking your records with the records of your banking institution to determine whether or not they reflect the same information. Are they in agreement? Are they in harmony? Are they congruent? We use the word integrity. Aha. So the same principle applies to this idea of checking in and saying, how am I doing with regard to how I'd like to be showing up? Am I on target? Am I way off base? Have I made a mistake that I need to correct in order to be more in tune with how I want this all to roll? That's it. It's a system of examination and evaluation. If there are mistakes, we correct them, and then we go, yes, it balanced to the penny. We have the same experience when we do this spiritually. So we're also going to look at some more definitions before we move further into this conversation. There is something called the Christian sacrament of reconciliation, which has a similar set of ideas built into it, of course, because all of these resources that we reflect on, these major religions, all come from the one universal source of inspiration. And each has his or her revelation and experience and shares that, and it's built upon. So here's what the Christian sacrament of reconciliation has built into it. And those of you who grew up in this know it already. The first one is contrition, which is an act of sincere self-examination, in this case with regard to the 10 Commandments, to see where one has sinned. Now, just a little asterisk on the side there, if you took our metaphysical Bible class and you read Irvin Seal's 10 words that will change your life, my goodness, you've got a whole new interpretation of what that means. You could do that all winter, right? Oh my goodness, I'm going to take a new look at the 10 Commandments and how I relate to each one of them from a metaphysical perspective. It's a whole other layer of meaning. So anyway, back to this. The second step in these 4 elements is confession. We've heard of that before. That's simply owning up honestly and accepting responsibility. And in the case of the Catholic Church, it would be to do this with your priest. And in many other Christian traditions, you would do this with your pastor, your minister, by whatever name you choose to call it. But you tell that trusted person. Then satisfaction. All I can think of is Mick Jagger saying that you can't get any satisfaction. So doing what is possible to repair harms and offering a prayer of contrition, which means sorrow, by the way, but we'll skip right over that. And then absolution, which is forgiveness. And in the case of the church, that is forgiveness by Jesus through the priest. Okay, so hang on to your hat because there's more. The definition of atonement, if we just step back from there and just go back to the dictionary, okay? Just the dictionary. Here's what atonement is. The act of making amends or reparation for guilt or wrongdoing. Okay, that's not a big deal. Reparation for a wrong or injury, which in religion is called sin, but otherwise it's just something that you didn't do right. Confession and atonement for sin, of course, is a religious definition of that term. And expiation is another term for the same thing. Great, so we have that. Now we go back to the narrower focus of Christian theology, and it says that atonement is considered the reconciliation of God and humankind through Jesus Christ. Back up again and put a pin in that, because we have interpretations about all of these things that we're going to talk about in a minute. Get this, though. Here's another part of the dictionary definition of the word atonement. It is early 16th century, denoting unity or reconciliation, especially between God and man. And it comes from, some of you know this, at one plus ment. And that is also influenced by the Latin adonamentum. I was working on that pronunciation earlier, which means unity, the Latin word for unity. And earlier, get this, one-ment, from an obsolete verb, one, meaning to unite. Now, I got to tell you, I had to wonder, how could the verb one, meaning to unite, possibly be obsolete? Therein lies the rub. Because if we're living in a world where the verb for our oneness is obsolete, no wonder we're having a little trouble here some days. Anyway, that's my opinion. So, in the spirit of honoring all paths, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, again, take the elements of these practices, the elements of these concepts, and we're going to strip away the religiosity, just as if we were to separate the baby from the bathwater, the wheat from the chaff, the gold from the dross. And why would we do that? Because what we believe here at Centers for Spiritual Living is that, yes, absolutely, it is good to ask questions. It is good to wonder. It is good to take things apart and put them back together yourself. I recognize this truth so strongly that it has led me on this irresistible path to be sitting here talking like this right now. So we have all that. We have this idea and this willingness that we're going to dive into this process of reconciliation, of atonement, minus the need for a middleman or woman, and that person having special powers to hear what we've got to say and to grant us forgiveness. Because we know everybody has special powers. Everyone is special. No one has any unique corner on the market when it comes to listening to another, caring for another, and no one has the power to forgive our mistakes but us. So, like I said, we're diving into some hot button topics here on purpose. And I'm smiling because there's controversy on the horizon. So, are you ready? Okay. Here's what our intention is. We're saying that if you strip away all that stuff, to sincerely examine with your own conscience and ask yourself where you have missed the mark in this, recognizing your oneness with God and others by whatever name you choose to call that power, your oneness with the infinite intelligence, your oneness with the absolute, your oneness with all life, universal intelligence, whatever. And to share that with one person whom you can trust, will not just run and tell everybody else. There's your sacrament. It's having at least one person that you can trust to share deeply with, who recognizes the sacredness of it and is not going to go tell everybody else because they're secure in who they are and they don't need to do that. They don't need to do that to you. So, one, sincerely examine. Now, you might say, I do this once a day, I do this once a week, I do this once a year, whatever. But whatever it is, to do that reconciliation, that examination, and ask yourself, where have I been in relation to where I would like to be, where my ideals, my values would have me be? And then say, you know what? I missed the mark here. And do it without guilt and shame, by the way, just as an observation without judgment. Share it with that person and then decide what you're going to do to repair it. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a moment. Decide what you're going to do to repair it and commit to that. Because when we do these things and we transcend error, we are forgiven. Now, let's get into forgiveness for a moment. Because if I'm doing my job right, there are some buttons pushed about, well, who has the right to forgive me? Well, guess what? This is all a language of the world of duality. This is all the language of living in the world of two powers. It's all the language of trying to clean up messes when we're dwelling in a world that has been created by a belief in two powers, in two-ness, as Barbara Waterhouse used to say, in two-ness. So it turns out that forgiveness is a DIY thing. It's a do-it-yourself thing. Because the fact of the matter is that there is no judgment in spirit. Spirit could not entertain the idea of good and bad and right and wrong. Then it would be divided against itself and it could not stand. It could not be whole. If you want to dig in and read your Science of Mind textbook or Living the Science of Mind about sin and error and punishment and heaven and hell, oh my goodness, have at it. Because There is no way that that which is all and creates all could entertain anything other than wholeness, or we wouldn't exist. The moment that two-ness is considered, it all falls apart. So when we run around in our daily lives and we look out at the world, look out the window and say, oh my God, there's so much to clean up. There is. We can do it the effortful way, which is to run around as much as we can every day, cleaning up the messes in the world, which has already been manifested by what we have individually and collectively thought, felt, said, and done over and over and over again, which means habitually, which means unconsciously. Or we can spend some time every day knowing the truth of all that is, of ourselves and one another, and that will stop creating that mess out there. So it can seem counterintuitive because we're used to living in this world. The way to correct error, mistakes, sin, the way to achieve forgiveness is to do something different. Even the word repent simply means to turn around, okay? So we've got that. So if we say, let's just take out all the trappings and do this reconciliation business our way, we practice sincere self-examination, we tell one trusted person, we do what is possible, which we now know is not just the effortful cleaning up in the outside world, but change our behavior. That is the biggest way to, quote, make amends to anyone else, is not to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I feel so guilty and ashamed. Yes, it's important to own up what we have done, absolutely. And even more important, to change our behavior, or that means nothing, and nothing has really changed. So we have that. And our big takeaway then is this. Ernest Holmes says, yes, we should absolutely come daily to the spirit of goodness for a complete washing away of all our mistakes and fears and troubles. He says that in, I think, the Science of Mind textbook on page 507. And also in the glossary, there's some great, there's always good stuff. So I'm hoping that something has kind of come through here, which is that when we say sin, we literally mean that we made a mistake. We unconsciously used the law of cause and effect to produce an undesirable outcome. If you are a fan of Brené Brown, you know that she explains there is a big difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is your conscience saying, I did something wrong. Shame is saying, I am someone wrong. Can you be a healthy person who experiences guilt when you do something wrong, choose to identify it and own it and correct it and move along? Or are you going to be feeling ashamed and just heap on another weighty reason why you're a bad person to the collection that you've been carrying your whole life? Big difference. People don't want our shame. They don't want our sorrow. They want us to be whole. So here's the deal. First of all, whether it is a religious thing or a self-help thing or just your own reason for regularly evaluating, how do I measure up with who I'd really like to be today? Tell one person, how am I going to clean it up? And now you know there's an easier way than physically cleaning up all those messes and then repeating them. And how am I going to acknowledge that because I owned today those things, my slate is clean. My slate is clean. Those of you who are involved in any kind of a self-help program where something similar goes on, once you've done this, you've done it. You don't go back and say, yeah, I was really terrible. When you do your work sincerely, you clean your slate. When Jesus healed, he saw people as clean, as whole, as not affected by the concepts and the weight of them that they had taken on about themselves and life. That's how healing is really achieved. So we're going to take a moment and turn the page and switch to the other part of our program. And when we get there, I'm going to have you do something. So if you have something to write on and you haven't written this down already, think about this. Number one, what is one comparison between how I would like to show up and how I have shown up that I would like to change? Number two, is there one person in this group of people that I know I'm with right now that I could tell privately about it? And if so, share it with that person in the chat. Or is this one of those ones that you'd like to just have more witnesses, more accountability buddies, so you're going to tell everybody? And are you willing to identify, here's one thing I'm going to do to turn that around, and acknowledge that in so doing, your slate is clean. You are forgiven. Okay? So we're going to close out this part of our program, and then we're going to play around with that, plus all of the ideas that you have around what you learned growing up versus what you're coming to know on now about these things. Because as we resolve them, they no longer get in our way. I like to think this example comes to mind. If my mom told me I had to do the dishes by X o'clock, I would do everything in my power to fight that. If she told me to clean my room before I could go do something else, I'd do everything in my power to put it off, because I was railing against authority instead of contemplating that maybe clean dishes or a clean room were good things. It's all in how we perceive this. So is there something for you in this that you're resisting because of earlier indoctrination? Can you strip that away and then say, yes, I would like to take stock now and then. I would like to unburden myself and realize I'm not alone by telling another person. I would like to make a plan to do things differently without beating myself up. I would like to step into the next moment or week or month or season or year with a clean slate. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to close out this part of our program, and then we're going to dive into all of that together. Okay. So thank you for being here. I am so grateful to be able to have all of you to share these revelations and conversations with, to have them with. I'm so grateful for each of you. Thank you for being here.